slipping across the grass. I dodged the 3 enormous longhorn bulls now calmly weaving through the crowd as if they owned the entire place, which, in a way, they did. One particularly daring bull paused to sniff a cake table before knocking it over with his horn, like a bored toddler tossing aside a toy. Nearby, Karina, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, stood frozen beside my broken fence, still clutching the garden shears she had used to cut it just hours earlier. Our eyes met, her jaw dropped, and all I could manage was, "You shouldn't have touched the gate." Everything began 3 days before this chaos, when I noticed something unusual about my side fence. It was a sturdy, steel-reinforced barrier separating my livestock pen from the HOA property next door. I built it that way for a reason, and not out of paranoia or drama, but because the neighbors on the other side acted as if the world revolved around them. My bulls posed no threat if left alone, but anyone foolish enough to cross into their territory would soon regret it. That day, I spotted faint marks on the gate's lock and shallow scratches along the edge, as if someone had been testing it. I checked the motion sensor logs and saw 2 alerts around midnight the night before. Reviewing the security footage, I froze. There was Karina holding a flashlight in her mouth and using a tiny metal saw on my padlock, like she was starring in a spy thriller. I stood there, partly amazed by her cluelessness. Karen had always been a headache. She moved in 2 years ago and immediately declared herself HOA president after winning a vote no one else even knew was happening. She imposed ridiculous rules like requiring all trash bins to be the same shade of gray, banning wind chimes longer than 5 inches, and once fined an elderly couple for having garden gnomes she deemed psychologically disruptive. Her power trip didn't stop at the HOA boundary, either. For months, she'd been trying to find any excuse to control my property, calling it unsightly and dangerous. I'd always stay just out of her reach until she got creative. One Thursday morning, flyers appeared in every mailbox on her side of the neighborhood. They announced the HOA Spring Fling Garden Party at the scenic open field by the ridge, promising food, games, and fun for everyone. What they didn't say was that the scenic field was actually my private land and that beyond the fence was my working livestock pen. I only discovered the flyer when a neighbor dropped one off, chuckling, "Looks like you're hosting now." I confronted Karen, but she feigned innocence. She claimed the flyer was symbolic and that the space was community property by visual proximity, whatever that meant. She insisted the fence was unnecessary and blocked the view. I blocked the view of what exactly? The back of my barn, my bulls? She didn't care. In her mind, any land not covered by one of her friend's lawn flamingos was public domain. That night, I reinforced the gate again and added a new padlock, installing a second trail camera focused on the fence base. The next morning, I woke to find the gate wide open and not broken nor forced, just completely cut out and set aside, like someone had fashioned a barn-themed runway. Standing in the middle of it, clipboard in hand and directing a party tent crew, was Karen. She waved at me like we were old friends and shouted something about adding a bounce house. My jaw clenched so hard I thought I cracked a molar. I warned her she had 30 seconds to leave before I called the sheriff, but she just laughed. "It's too late," she said. "Guests are on their way. You'll thank me later." The worst part? Legally, I couldn't stop her. That section wasn't marked with any no trespassing sign, so something I'd meant to fix but never did. Even though she was clearly in the wrong, I knew if I pushed too hard without solid proof, she'd twist the story and make me look like the aggressor. So I decided to wait. I knew the bulls would be back that evening from my friend's ranch, where they'd spent a week during some pasture renovations. I made a call and moved up their return. By nightfall, they were peacefully grazing inside their pen, secured by a digital latch that only responded to my key fob. The next day, party streamers hung, tables folded out, coolers stacked too high, and a karaoke machine somehow playing only yacht rock. Strangers roamed my land in polo shirts and wide-brimmed hats, acting like they were on safari. Karen had even set up a drink station under a fake cabana, labeled HOA VIP Lounge. But the real drama began around 4 p.m. A little boy, maybe 6 or 7, ran to the gate and started pulling on it. One of the adults, a guy in cargo shorts who looked like he hadn't used a 2-linear saw, helped him open it, assuming it was just a decorative arch. What happened next was a blur of dust, snorts, and frantic screams as my three bulls, a tank, Diesel, and Whiskia stepped into the spotlight. They didn't charge or act aggressive, but their territorial presence alone sparked sheer panic among the guests. A woman dove headfirst into a cooler, a man attempted to climb a plastic table and ended up flat on his back, and a group of teenagers scattered into a patch of thistles. Karen stood frozen, eyes wide and lips trembling, clutching a skewer of grilled pineapple like it was some kind of magic wand. I climbed the slope behind the barn, remote in hand, and blew the recall whistle. Instantly, the bulls stopped in their tracks, then slowly turned and walked back to their pen as if wrapping up a scene in a play. Nobody cheered. Nobody even breathed. Just as Karen spun around to shout, my drone camera buzzed overhead, hovering right above her. Its red recording light blinked steadily. She dropped the garden shears. The game was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to two things: a voicemail from Deputy Allen asking me to bring in my footage, and a notification on the HOA app titled Incident at the Field A Emergency Home Meeting Tonight. I didn't need to open the message to know who sent it. Karen was already scheming damage control, completely unaware of how deep she'd just dug herself into a hole. First, I grabbed my hard drives, drone footage, and a fresh cup of coffee. I settled in to watch the spectacle I'd captured the day before. The video was part comedy, part courtroom evidence, and part sweet justice, all in crisp HD. It started with Karen laughing as she clipped my lock like it was a minor inconvenience, then showed her ushering in party guests while bragging about solving the ugly fence problem. Then came the infamous Bullgate moment: chaos, screaming, and her ghostly white face when she noticed the drone overhead. It was even better than I remembered. Around noon, I drove to the sheriff's office to meet with Deputy Allen. He was already familiar with the case, having responded to Karen's frantic call the day before where she claimed I had deliberately unleashed wild bulls to trample children. When I handed over the footage and explained my bulls were trained under federal agricultural crowd control programs, his eyebrows shot up. He leaned back, smirked, and muttered, "So she cut your fence, threw an illegal party on your land, and now wants to accuse you of biological warfare?" I nodded. He chuckled, shook his head, and said he'd file a formal report for the county prosecutor. He also advised me to document everything carefully and prepare for what he called Karen's legal temper tantrum. I spent the rest of the day printing photos of the broken gate, screenshotting timestamps, and organizing everything into a neat case folder. Meanwhile, texts from neighbors poured in, some I barely knew, offering sympathy, embarrassment, and even quiet applause. Apparently, Karen's garden party had become the neighborhood's most talked about disaster. One woman wrote, "My son is still talking about the bull that flipped the grill. Honestly, best party he's ever been to." Another joked, "Can I rent your bulls next time my in-laws visit?" By the time the emergency home meeting rolled around that evening, I'd decided to attend and not to argue, but to observe. I sat quietly at the back of the clubhouse while Karen stood at the front, wearing a pastel blazer and a neck brace she definitely wasn't wearing earlier. She claimed she'd been injured during the stampede, clutching a crumpled flyer like a badge of innocence. She told the group I'd installed dangerous exotic animals without warning and insisted my property should face new inspections and tighter security measures. She called it a public safety risk affecting everyone. I waited for someone to speak up. Silence. Finally, Ron, an older board member who rarely said a word, raised his hand and asked, "Karen, didn't you cut his fence?" She stammered, her face flushing red. "That's irrelevant. The point is," he retaliated. I raised my hand. Karen froze, her eyes locking on me like I was a judge about to rule in a courtroom. Calmly, I asked if I could speak. I stepped forward with my stack of printed photos. No yelling, no dramatics, just facts. I showed her cutting my lock with bolt cutters. I showed her directing the party crew onto my property. I showed the footage of the gate being opened, the bulls calmly walking in, and the chaos that followed. I even displayed a frame of her standing next to a handmade sign reading HOA Event Zone, planted in my field without permission. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Karen tried to pivot, accusing me of weaponizing livestock to intimidate her. I replied that I had state licenses and training credentials for crowd-controlled livestock. She claimed I set her up, I asked why. Then, she was caught on camera laughing right after cutting my fence. She had no answer. Someone from the audience muttered, "Karen, maybe sit down." That broke the tension, and a few people chuckled. Ron whispered to the treasurer, who nodded. The HOA vice president, clearly trying to distance herself from the mess, announced the board would review the footage and issue a private statement later that week. Karen made one last plea, accusing me of humiliating her in front of the community. I said I hadn't humiliated her, she'd simply been caught on camera. Over the next 2 days, the community response exploded. The HOA group chat was filled with heated debate. Some defended Karen, but most were furious about how she'd endangered children, lied about her actions, and tried to paint herself as the victim. Someone even created a meme of her standing near the bulls with a speech bubble saying, "Just add glitter, it'll be fine." Another neighbor printed a sign and posted it near the ridge, "Private property now with extra horns, enter at your own risk." Karen demanded it be taken down, but it wasn't. Meanwhile, I filed a civil complaint for trespassing and property damage. I wasn't after money, I just wanted the damage and danger officially recorded. Unsurprisingly, Karen fired back with a counterclaim accusing me of trauma, injury, and reputational harm. Her lawyer was a local guy who advertised on park benches, promising results in under 30 days or your next consultation free. I wasn't worried. I had solid evidence, witnesses, and a mountain of common sense on my side. Meanwhile, Karen showed up with an online bought neck brace and a hilariously bad photoshopped picture of my bulls with glowing red eyes, like something out of a horror flick. It only made her case look more ridiculous. Then came a surprising twist. I got a call from a regional agricultural official who'd seen my footage. He used to work in the same federal livestock training program I'd partnered with years ago. He asked if I'd be willing to help teach a new livestock safety course using the HLA party footage as a real-world example. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the phone. But he was serious. This was a perfect case study on how ignoring livestock boundaries and letting egos run wild could cause serious liability. No staged video could match the authenticity of this disaster. I told him I'd think about it, but deep down I knew the answer was yes. Karen had tried to ruin me, but she'd inadvertently turned my bulls into stars of livestock safety training. This wasn't just about settling a neighborhood feud anymore, it was about showing that sometimes the best lesson comes from a bull named Diesel with a nose for justice. 2 weeks had passed since the infamous bull incident, yet the fallout still rippled through the community like wildfire in dry grass. You'd think after a herd of trained longhorns marched through a backyard luau and flipped over a buffet table, people would tread carefully. But somehow, Karen spun her embarrassment into a bizarre badge of honor. She told anyone who'd listened that she'd survived a targeted livestock ambush and was heroically recovering from trauma, all while continuing her duties as HOA president. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Karen started wearing sunglasses in public to dodge imaginary press attention, even though no reporter had written a single word about her. She wanted to be a martyr, but nobody bought it. Especially not after my footage quietly debuted at the county office as part of my trespassing complaint. That video spread fast. A county agriculture officer forwarded it to colleagues, and soon it landed in the hands of a livestock behavior expert in Austin. Then it made the rounds in law enforcement training groups, especially the part where my bulls calmly cornered the DJ without a single touch and stood still until called back. Suddenly, I was getting emails asking if I'd consider hosting training sessions or speaking at seminars. A few universities even reached out to study the bulls' reactions in chaotic situations. Karen tried to humiliate me but accidentally launched a side business I never expected. Of course, not everyone in the HOA was thrilled. A small faction still clung to Karen's version of events, claiming I'd overreacted and weaponized animals for intimidation. One woman joked about my barn hiding a secret underground lair full of military-grade livestock. I wasn't sure if she was serious, but honestly, I didn't care. Every wild rumor just doubled the calls from curious neighbors wanting tours or lessons. I even gave my lead bull, Tank, his own social media account, and somehow he racked up over 6,000 followers in a week. The top video? Tank calmly nudging a folding chair with his horn, then strutting away like a nightclub bouncer. Meanwhile, Karen's countersuit finally landed, just as absurd as I expected. Her lawyer, who looked like he printed his own business cards at the library, claimed my property was a public health hazard, that my bulls intended to intimidate, and that I'd created a psychological atmosphere of fear. They attached stills from the party, trying to prove negligence. One showed a child running from the bulls, which might have been convincing, if the child hadn't tripped over a garden flamingo and the bulls hadn't been yards away on the opposite side of the pasture. I handed all this to my attorney, who nearly laughed her way through it. She pointed out at least a dozen contradictions. Karen claimed physical injuries never reported to any medical professional, timelines that didn't add up, and more. She crafted a calm, surgical, and utterly devastating response, including affidavits from my vet, the sheriff, 2 parents from the party, and even the HOA vice president, who publicly turned on Karen after seeing how far she'd take her lies. The court date was set for early next month. Until then, Karen kept digging her own hole, sending HOA-wide emails with long, dramatic rants titled "A Leader's Burden" and "When the System Fails Us." They were meant to rally support but mostly got shared with sarcastic comments. My favorite reply: "Karen, it was a birthday party, not the Battle of Troy." Slowly, her supporters began to peel away, realizing that not only was Karen clearly in the wrong, but more than that, she was making the whole neighborhood look ridiculous. A few people even apologized to me privately, including a board member who said, "I didn't think it was that serious until I saw her chopping your fence on camera like she was defusing a bomb." Then something unexpected happened. One day, I found an envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a USB stick and a simple note: "You didn't hear this from me." I plugged it in cautiously, expecting some kind of prank or worse, but what I saw was clear, close-up security footage from one of the home members' home cameras. It showed Karen and 2 friends the night before the party, laughing as they cut through my fence, then rehearsing what to say if anyone asked whose land it was. One of them said, "Just act confused. He'll get over it." The video was time-stamped, high quality, and utterly damning. I took it straight to my attorney, who immediately added it to our growing mountain of evidence. It clearly showed premeditated trespassing, deliberate destruction of private property, and a coordinated plan to lie about it afterward. At that point, we didn't even have to push for financial damages. Walking into that courtroom, we were going to make Karen look like a cartoon villain armed with garden tools. But I had one more move left before then. The next home meeting was scheduled just days after we added the new footage to our case. I decided it was time to stop sitting quietly in the back. I arrived early, set up a small projector and screen, and waited. Karen showed up looking smug, wearing yet another one of her exaggerated neck braces, and took her seat at the front, ignoring me completely. The room filled quickly at this time. Everyone wanted to see what was coming. When the meeting began, I asked permission to share something with the group. Karen tried to object, but the board allowed it. I dimmed the lights and hit play. The room fell silent as the footage played, showing Karen slicing through the fence, directing people onto my land, and laughing about it. When it ended, I said nothing. I didn't need to. The silence that followed spoke volumes. Karen stood up, face flushed, shaking, and shouted something about invasion of privacy. Someone from the back calmly replied, "You did it on someone else's land. Genius." That was the breaking point. Karen stormed out, knocking over a chair as she left. Half the room followed her, the other half stayed behind, some clapping, others just stunned. I packed up my equipment, nodded to the board, and walked out. The legal battle wasn't over, but the war for the community's trust had already been won, and I hadn't said a single word. I'd let her hang herself with her own footage. All it took was a few bulls, one whistle, and a very well-placed drone. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and tension. Karen sat across from me, wearing a baby blue blazer. Her posture was stiff, her expression a frozen mix of indignation and forced calm. Her lawyer at the bench, advertising guy with a comb-over and a briefcase that looked 2 decades too old, fumbled with a stack of papers he clearly hadn't read. My attorney sat beside me, calm and quietly confident, flipping through our file like she already knew the final score. Honestly, we did but we were going to play it right. The judge, a middle-aged woman with zero tolerance for theatrics, called the session to order. Karen's side went first, Her lawyer began with dramatic but hollow opening remarks, painting Karen as a woman under siege, a community leader targeted by livestock intimidation. He claimed she'd suffered an emotional collapse, repeatedly using the phrase psychological ambush. At one point, he compared the bulls to attack dogs unleashed at a daycare. That's when the judge interrupted, asking if he was aware the animals were licensed and trained under federal guidelines. He stuttered, paused, then admitted he wasn't prepared to debate livestock credentials. That didn't help his case. Karen took the stand next. She walked stiffly to the witness box, still wearing the neck brace she'd started sporting after the incident. Even though multiple people had seen her shopping without it just 2 days before, she launched into a dramatic speech about fear, trauma, and betrayal. Real tears or not, I couldn't tell, someone muttered from the back. She described the bulls as monsters, claimed they chased her for sport, and even said she had hooves imprinted on her soul. That line made someone cough loudly, trying not to laugh. Karen accused me of being a recluse nursing a grudge against civilization, saying, I trained the bulls not for protection but for revenge. She painted herself as a misunderstood public servant caught in the crossfire of rural savagery. It was theatrical, tearful, and wildly off-script. Then it was our turn. My attorney wasted no time. Calmly, she laid out the facts. I own the land, the bulls are registered, the gate was reinforced and secured, and Karen had cut through it with bolt cutters the night before the party. She presented photos, timestamps, and video footage, each piece more damning than the last. The judge watched intently, occasionally jotting notes. When we played the video of Karen and her 2 friends laughing and rehearsing excuses about just acting confused, the courtroom fell silent. Even her own lawyer rubbed his forehead in frustration. My attorney calmly closed by stating that I had no intention of seeking excessive damages or turning this into a spectacle. We only wanted accountability and nothing more. We weren't there to humiliate anyone, we were there to draw a clear line that Karen had crossed far too many times. The most powerful moment came when we called Deputy Allen to the stand, as the responding officer on the day of the incident. He testified in uniform with a steady, clear voice. He described the scene exactly as it happened, confirmed the bulls never made physical contact with anyone, and verified that Karen admitted on the day of the incident to opening the fence herself. He also confirmed that I had called the authorities with proper warning and had already secured the bulls before his arrival. The judge nodded several times during his testimony. I could see Karen's story unraveling before her eyes. Karen's lawyer tried to counter by claiming the footage was selectively edited and that my motives stemmed from decades of social disconnect. He argued I was anti-HOA by principle, which may have been true, but wasn't illegal. The judge interrupted him mid-sentence, asking if he had any witnesses to back Karen's version. He stammered and then quietly sat down. That's when I knew it was over. The verdict came quickly. The judge dismissed Karen's countersuit entirely and ruled in my favor on all counts. She ordered Karen to cover the costs of property damage, including fence repair, security system recalibration, and the disrupted bull handling schedule. She also issued a stern warning against filing frivolous lawsuits and abusing HOA authority. But the real blow came when the judge allowed us to publicize the ruling. In a tight-knit community like ours, where news spreads faster than wildfire, this was far more damaging than any fine. When court adjourned, Karen avoided eye contact as she shuffled out, her neck brace still wrapped like a last-ditch shield. Her lawyer disappeared without a word. I stood in the hallway afterward and not gloating, just absorbing the moment. It felt quiet rather than triumphant, like watching a storm finally pass after days of tension. A few home members who attended approached me with awkward smiles. One older woman, who had once supported Karen, simply said, "We didn't realize it was this bad." "I'm sorry." That was enough. Over the next few days, word of the court's outcome spread through every group chat, neighborhood meeting, and mailbox flyer. Someone even created a fake newsletter called The Bull Truth featuring Karen's stunned expression beneath the headline "Case Closed." By the end of the week, a petition demanding Karen's resignation from the HOA board circulated. I didn't sign it, I didn't need to. The signatures poured in without my involvement. People had seen enough. Karen held one last meeting to try salvaging her position, but fewer than 10 people showed up and several walked out mid-speech. She accused others of betrayal, claimed the community was brainwashed, and insisted one day people would see through the rural manipulation. Nobody clapped or argued, they just left. The next morning, her resignation letter landed in everyone's inbox. It was short, bitter, and claimed she was stepping down for personal reflection. I didn't throw a party or announce anything. I simply walked to the edge of my property, past the newly repaired fence, to where my bulls grazed peacefully. Diesel looked up and flicked his tail lazily. I gave a short whistle, and he trotted over to nuzzle my arm. I stood there for a long moment, letting the silence settle. No yelling, no fences cut, no lawn invasions, just the wind, the grass, and the quiet weight of justice served right. In the end, it wasn't about the party, the fence, or even the bulls. It was about a line that shouldn't have been crossed. A property line, yes, but also a line of respect, boundaries, and knowing when enough is enough. Karen thought she could push that line because no one had stopped her before. She was wrong, and she learned the hard way that some fences aren't just there to block views, they're there to hold back the storm. 3 weeks after Karen's resignation, the neighborhood settled into a surprisingly peaceful rhythm for the first time in 2 years. No more unsolicited citations taped to doors, bizarre rules about lawn flamingos or mailbox shapes, and no angry HOA emails at midnight ranting about fence paint color. It was like the whole neighborhood finally exhaled. Karen's house sat quiet and uncharacteristically unkempt. The once aggressively trimmed hedges showed signs of life. Rumor had it she was still around, laying low, planning to move once the lawsuits and damage to her reputation cooled off. Whether that was true didn't matter anymore. The storm had passed, and in its wake, the community rediscovered its sense of humor. At the first home meeting post-Karen, the board felt more like a support group than a governing body. People laughed, cracked jokes about bulletproof permits, and even brought cookies shaped like tiny cows. It was ridiculous, but it was the kind of ridiculous everyone welcomed. The HOA vice president, now acting as interim president, led with a different style, quiet, fair, genuinely interested in listening. She even stopped by my place one afternoon with a box of muffins and asked if I'd be willing to host a community education event about livestock and rural property boundaries. I said yes, mostly because the irony was too good to pass up. A week later, I set up a tent near the repaired fence, laid out folding chairs, and put Tank, Diesel, and Whiskey through their paces in front of a crowd of curious neighbors. The bulls behaved like seasoned professionals. The bulls responded perfectly to hand signals and whistle commands, stopping at distance markers and calmly moving through mock scenarios. The kids were mesmerized, and the adults were stunned, and no one had realized just how intelligent, gentle, and well-trained these animals really were. When I explained that each bull was part of a federal agricultural deterrent program designed for large properties bordering vulnerable zones, jaws literally dropped. Someone whispered, "So you're telling me Karen picked a fight with tactical bulls?" I nodded, and the crowd burst out laughing. The best moment came when one of the kids asked if the bulls had names. I told them, and right on cue, Tank gave a perfectly timed snort. That clip went viral on social media within days, and suddenly the bulls had their own fan base. A local radio host even invited me on air to talk about what they called the most accidental legend in HOA history. I did the interview from my barn office, trying not to laugh every time they referred to the incident as the Great Fence Fiasco. I didn't gloat or brag, I just told the story exactly as it happened and let the absurdity speak for itself. That seemed to resonate more than any rant or public takedown ever could. Meanwhile, Karen's troubles weren't over. Though she'd stepped down from the HOA and stopped showing her face around town, legal consequences remained. The court-ordered restitution payments had started, requiring her to pay monthly installments for the damages she caused. From what I heard, she tried appealing the amount, but the judge shut it down immediately. Her lawyer vanished shortly after the verdict, either fired or too embarrassed to continue. It was as if her entire empire of control crumbled in slow motion, leaving her with no one left to scream at but herself. Around that time, I got an unexpected call from a regional HOA advisory group. They'd seen the court case summary, watched the footage, and wanted to use the incident as a cautionary tale in training programs for board members. They asked if I'd be open to contributing a statement or even appearing in a recorded interview about respecting property lines and preventing power abuse. I agreed if my bulls and I could stop even one Karen from losing her mind with garden shears, it would be worth it. Then, as if the universe hadn't already delivered enough closure, one final twist came my way. A local artist who lived just 2 streets over stopped by and asked if she could create a sculpture commemorating the incident, and not as a serious tribute, but as a light-hearted piece marking what the neighborhood had survived. I told her to go for it. A month later, she unveiled a 4-foot metal sculpture titled The Reckoning, featuring a bull with sunglasses standing next to a shattered clipboard. It now sits at the edge of the community park, just within view of where Karen once held her unauthorized garden party. People take selfies with it, kids call it Tank Jr. Every time I walk past, I can't help but smiling, not because I won or Karen lost, but because the truth didn't need to shout to be heard. It just needed to walk in calmly, with a pair of horns, let the facts do their work, and let time handle the rest. The community changed, and not because I forced it, but because it finally saw the absurdity of what it had allowed and decided to wake up. Now, when I sit on my back porch sipping coffee, I hear laughter from across the field instead of angry rants or threats shouted in the night. My bulls roam freely inside their pen, heads held high, calm as ever. Sometimes I give a low whistle and watch them trot over, still obedient, still sharp. I think about how it all started with a cut fence and a party, and how it turned into something much bigger. A reminder of what happens when arrogance meets immovable boundaries. Karen's house finally went up for sale 4 months after the lawsuit, and no fanfare, no farewell, no apology, just a quiet for sale sign stuck in the lawn, decorated with a fading, crooked smiley face. Last I heard, she moved to a new neighborhood 2 towns over, a one without livestock, fences, or, presumably, bulls. Maybe she learned something, maybe not. But one thing's for sure, she'll never walk past a pasture again without remembering the day she learned what real consequences look like. And that's a lesson you can't put in any rulebook. That's a lesson delivered straight through a gate she never should have touched in the first place.